James Hansen, our foremost climatologist, the NASA scientist, said last year that we had, his modeling showed, 10 years in order to reverse the flow of carbon into the atmosphere, start putting less in instead of more, or otherwise we would cross the set of red lines where events like that. Remember, this is not the sort of just straight ahead global warming that's already pretty horrible as it is, where events like that would become increasingly unavoidable. Probably the most important number in the world right now, and I just wrote a little essay about this for the next issue of Foreign Policy magazine, maybe the most important number in the world right now is 450, okay? That's the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that represents our best guess at what that red line might be. At the moment, the atmospheric concentration of CO2 is 383 parts per million. It's increasing to better than 2 parts per million annually. You get some idea of how close we are coming and how quickly we're approaching these very dramatic thresholds and lines. I'm not going to spend any time, really, telling you about all the kind of long list of effects. I assume that most of you have seen the movie, you know, and have some idea of what's coming at us. The effects will be felt most profoundly at the very beginning in the world's most marginalized communities, where, according to the IPCC data released earlier this month, there are literally hundreds of millions and perhaps billions of human beings at severe risk for having, among other things, to simply leave the place where they live in the very near future. There's enormous risk to the rest of creation, the extinction consequences of a rapid warming, not again of this, you know, extreme events like the melt of Greenland, just the steady incremental warming that we're going to see this century without dramatic change. The extinction consequences of those are projected to be as large as the last time a major asteroid slammed into the Earth about 75 million years ago, except this time the asteroid is us. The only set of consequences I'm going to talk about for a moment today, because they get talked about less in a sense, are to attempt to give you just a glimpse into what the kind of economic and business consequences of a very rapid global warming would look like. I mean, some of them are easy to figure out because there are already industries that are starting to disappear and whose future is, you know, clearly in doubt. For instance, it's not, I think, a very good moment to invest in the ski industry. Around the world, the amount of snow and the elevations at which it falls are changing and changing rapidly. That kind of change, skiing, though in Vermont, where I live, is a major fact of life. Skiing is obviously not, you know, one of the absolute crucial industries in the entire world. On the other hand, that same set of ecological changes and changes in things like seasonality affecting it will before long begin to play out in absolutely critical sectors, agriculture sort of probably being the most obvious example, and the place that we're probably most foolish of all to allow to destabilize going forward. But for business in general, quite aside from all the legal and reputational and brand and liability risks that it's easy to enumerate at some length, just think about one or two technologies that may become passé, may become sort of impossible to use in the future. If you asked me for my nomination of what the most important of those would be, it might be, in fact, the actuarial table, okay? Now, of all human inventions, aside from learning how to burn fossil fuels, it's possible that the actuarial table did more than anything else to allow the kind of prosperity and growth that we have seen. It's allowed us to take enormous amounts of risk that we wouldn't otherwise take or be able to take, okay? As a technology, it's one of the truly great achievements of the human mind and imagination. And the insurance industry that it is built upon it is absolutely critical to everything we do. The only problem with the actuarial table is that its one key fundamental assumption is that the world in the future will behave more or less as the world behaved in the past. Remove that assumption, and this great technology becomes increasingly trivial and worthless because the world no longer works on those assumptions. And that's precisely what we're beginning to do. The insurance industry began to realize this quite a while ago, which is why it was the first part of our financial sector to begin to raise an alarm, especially among the European insurers and reinsurers. That alarm has become quite loud in recent years. Last year, Swiss Re, which I think is either Swiss or Munich Re is the biggest, but one of the two biggest, and the Harvard School of Public Health issued together a report on future effects on the economy and on other things of rapid climate change. And they were using a set of scenarios, and the scenario that I'm going to describe here isn't, again, this catastrophic one where Greenland sinks into the ocean. It's more or less the one that we're bought into or seem to be buying into unless we change very rapidly. Steady growth in temperature with some surprises along the way, particularly the kind of increased storminess for which data we're now beginning to, in the wake of Katrina, see more and more evidence of. Here's how they summarized what a scenario like that over the next 50 years would look like. The scenario would involve blows to the world economy sufficiently severe to cripple the resilience that enables affluent countries to respond to catastrophes. In effect, parts of developed countries would experience developing nation conditions for prolonged periods as a result of natural catastrophes and increasing vulnerability due to the abbreviated return time of extreme events. If you think that sounds just sort of crazy and impossible and whatever, take a trip to New Orleans, okay? Look at the vast sections of one of the great cities in America that aren't ever coming back and that no one has any idea how to bring back and that no one's even really trying to bring back at this point. And imagine then how that same set of changes and economic conditions would play out in places much less able to deal with them even than we are, as this same report said. The compounding effect of massive and concurrent losses would become visible in many lines of the insurance business. As a result, insurers would withdraw from a variety of markets, particularly coastal ones and places vulnerable to sea level rise. Contraction by insurers has, as they put it, a dampening effect on economic activity. That may turn out to be one of the understatements of this century, okay? And as I say, these are not distant scenarios. These are not something that we're taught. 10 years, which is what Hansen gave us a year ago, so I guess we could say 9 years, isn't a very long time. It's 2 presidential election cycles. It's 4, it's 4 congressional cycles. Even in the very short-term world that sometimes people attribute the corporate worldview to, it's only 40 quarters, change. The waste of time that we've already wasted has come at significant cost. Just to give you some idea, when the IPCC issued its latest update in January, one of the footnotes was, to me, the most interesting thing in the whole report. It was a calculation of what would have happened if we had stabilized world carbon emissions at 2000 levels by the year 2000. If we'd done, in essence, what President Clinton promised to do on first taking office, not only in the US, but around the world. And what they said was, if we'd managed to do that, we would now be facing decadal increases of 0.1 degree Celsius, a tenth of a degree Celsius, instead of decadal increases of 0.2 degrees Celsius, i.e., that wasted decade of the 1990s when we did nothing to address this problem, especially in this country, has cost us that much already. The delay and procrastination penalty for dealing with this problem is acute. It makes it different from almost all the other problems that we deal with, because if you ignore it, it gets endlessly more difficult to deal with. I got to tell you that there are people who say already, scientists, that we have crossed certain of these red lines and that we may have waited too long to really begin taking action.